Hey everybody, it's CVH here, and today I'll be bringing you the fourth and final installment of my first impressions videos for the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood expansion for Elder Scrolls Legends, coming out actually on tomorrow, April 5th. It's I said it was quickly approaching last video, and we are really getting there. So, in this video, as with the last few, I'll be talking about all of the cards revealed by Bethesda Direwolf and the community over the course of the past week or so. Obviously, since we're getting so close to release, they've been previewing cards at a very rapid rate. So we actually have about 10 cards, I think, to go through today in this video. So I'll be trying to go through it quickly, but of course, if you want to skip to a specific card to see what I say about it, I will leave the timestamps in the description for your viewing pleasure at your discretion. Of course, we'll also probably know the full set list soon, probably either later today or tomorrow, definitely, when the set actually releases. We'll know everything in the set. But for the sake of this video, I'm just doing these on the previewed cards over the course of the last week. I've had a time to think about these a little bit more and, soak them in. And of course, tomorrow I will be posting and I'll be streaming the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, streaming through the story mode of it, and look forward to it being posted on YouTube as well. If you happen to miss the stream or you don't typically get to watch my streams, it should be up here as well. But enough beating around the bush, we have cards to reveal. So as with the last video, I'm going to be going up the rarity sort of chain, starting with the commons, going into some rares and epic. One epic, I believe. Starting with Gristlehide Dreugh. So we have a 5-drop 3/5 neutral and a common. So this card has some pretty obvious similarities to the Hearthstone card Acolyte of Pain, which is whenever it takes damage, you draw a card. This card, however, costs 5 and is a 3/5 and has to survive in order to get you to the card draw. So if someone's trading into it with a 5/5, for example, like the monthly card Sower of Revenge, you will not be drawing a card for that, unfortunately. So I don't really think this card has too much merit. Perhaps if it also functioned like Acolyte of Pain and that it got the card even if the Gristlehide Dreugh didn't survive, I could see it being more reasonable. In Arena, the stats really aren't too reasonable. You compare it to the Dreugh, which is a 4-drop 3/5 with no effect. Now, I think this card, has a little bit more use than that card in Arena because, people do tend to run out of cards pretty frequently. So I could see it, it's being a common, you could see it pretty often, and not everything is going to just run over a 3/5 or be an easy answer. In Constructed, it's too much of a silence target, it dies to too many things, it's too slow against aggro. I could list some more reasons why I don't think it's going to see play, Belligerent Giant being one of them, but you guys get the idea. I think this card is sort of relegated to Arena. And we move on to Stealer of Secrets, which is another card that I think sort of suffers the same fate. 6-drop 1/1 with Ward, summon +1/+1 for each action in your discard pile. So this card, while the other card has similarities to a Hearthstone card, this card has a lot of similarities to another card in Elder Scrolls Legends, that being Flesh Atronach, which gets +1/+1 on summon for each creature in your discard pile. Of course, Stealer of Secrets has the obvious benefit of having Ward, which is pretty huge when you're considering how someone's going to remove one of your larger threats. Unfortunately, Stealer of Secrets is probably going to be substantially smaller in most decks than the Flesh Atronach would be in the decks that wanted to play it, which are almost nil in actual competitive play. You could see this as maybe a sort of alternate win condition for a deck like a Swindler's Market deck with a lot of actions, or an action mage or an action assassin, but I don't think it's reliable enough. A lot of the things I mentioned that counter the Dreugh, such as Belligerent Giant and Silences, also affect this card, in addition to it being more expensive and just one-shotted by the Earthbone Spinner, for example. And the benefit, if it survives, is pretty negligible unless you're building a very specific style of deck that usually probably wouldn't require this for a win condition. In Arena, I actually think, unlike the Dreugh, this gets worse, because Arena decks typically have very few actions as far as the decks that I've played, at least, and I've played a good amount of Arena, so I don't see this card being much bigger than a 6-drop 3/3 or 4/4 with Ward on curve, and that's if you get pretty lucky. So moving on. Fortunately, we do have some very powerful commons that have been revealed that we can talk about now, one of which is right in front of us, Dark Guardian, and I apologize for the picture quality on a few of these. I'm using the Legends decks images, so it's basically what people have uploaded so far. There should be better images on that site, probably tomorrow after the set's actual release, but Dark Guardian is a 3-drop 2/5 and Endurance with Guard, so already a 3-drop 2/5 Guard. I'm ready to probably play it, and when your opponent draws a prophecy from a rune being destroyed, draw a card. So, you don't necessarily need the cards against an aggressive deck, but you do need a 3-drop 2/5 Guard. And if you have that against Prophecy Battle Mage, and you do happen to start attacking in procs and prophecies, you're not going to say no to the extra cards as well. So this card, I think, is very versatile. It's very powerful as a 2/5 guard early against aggression for obvious reasons. It's going to trade with enough to make it worthwhile, I think, being a guard. And when you're actually trying to play a more mid-rangey aggressive deck, if you're actually starting to push, drawing those extra cards could be really valuable as well. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I believe you draw the card. I don't know if this has been confirmed or denied, but I'm pretty sure you draw the card if you hit a prophecy, even if your opponent chooses not to play it. I feel like that's how it would go because, you know, when you hit a prophecy, it sort of goes off to the side, and you and your opponent both know you hit a prophecy at that point. They can choose to put it in their hand instead of playing it for free. I feel like Dark Guardian still nets you a card in those situations, but, you know, most prophecies that you hit are played in the first place. If it was the other way, your opponent would just be denied the ability to play the card if they didn't want you to draw a card, and that would be a pretty detrimental to their strategy as well. But I do think Dark Guardian, for the sake of its stats and being guard, and a pretty useful effect throughout a variety of matchups, I think this card is seeing a lot of play moving forward. And now we move on to yet another common, Protector of the Innocent. So this is a card I don't think I need to talk about too much. 2-drop 3/2. Now this card has some very obvious similarities to a Lurking Crocodile with a 2-drop 3/2 Prophecy. The only difference is that this card is red, a Nord, and has Guard. So Guard being the main one obviously there. Obviously I think any deck that's in red that wants to play Lurking Crocodile probably wants to play this card maybe instead of it, at least in addition to. It seems strictly better on the front, but I do want to mention the fact that sometimes Guard is a detriment to decks like Prophecy, Aggro, Battle Mage. In the mirror match, sure, it's okay and everything, but there's a lot of times when I try to like play Lurking Crocodile to maximum effect, it's either very early in the game, or it's when you get it off a Prophecy, or you're just drawing it off the top of your deck and you stick it in the Shadow Lane and hope it survives one turn just because you need like that 3 damage. You're like, I want to top deck any creature, I want to play it in the Shadow Lane, I just need my opponent not to answer it. And Protector of the Innocent kind of forces your opponent to answer because it has Guard, so you can't even really protect it against if your opponent started to stabilize and they have a lot of things that can trade with your creatures. This card could be worse than Lurking Crocodile in those situations. Whether or not I think that matters enough to that deck, the answer is probably no. I think you'd probably still play Protector of the Innocent, and I think this encourages more decks that are heavier in red for aggression, so maybe we see more Mighty Allies as well. I've been playing that card a bit more recently, and I think this card helps Mighty Allies' case quite a bit. So moving on to Marked Man, another common, and I think this is the last common we have. Invisible Gatorade, my favorite. So Marked Man is a card I haven't seen a whole lot of people talk about, and I think the reason is you have to kind of look at this card a little bit deeper than surface evaluation. If we start by looking at it, it looks pretty unimpressive, right? We have a 1-drop 1/1 with summon, put a 0/2 makeshift defenses with Guard into your hand. So almost a Spider Worker, not even quite, well, not the Spider Worker, the Dwarven Spider, the 0/3 Guard, but we have a 0/2, and I'm pretty sure it costs 0. I believe that's been confirmed, and it's an Imperial, so if we ever get Imperial synergy, there's that. A lot of cards in Willpower are Imperials, but I think looking past the surface a bit, besides like the strict value of the card by itself, I think this card is actually pretty versatile for a token strategy. So besides like the obvious synergy with cards like 5th Legion, Trainer, Bruma Profiteer, even Bruma Armor, and Divine Fervor, I think this card is really good because it allows you to get more consistency out of cards like Siege Catapult and Pit Lion. So on turn 1 you can play the Marked Man and put the defenses in your hand, and whenever you draw a Pit Lion later in the game, if you have one thing in one lane, you just put the defenses in the other lane, and you're good to play Pit Lion wherever you want. Or if you have a Siege Catapult on the board and you draw Marked Man, it is a 1-cost card that allows you to put 2 creatures in the same lane, if that's what you want to do. Of course, Marked Man, you get it to your hand, so you get to choose where you want to put it, but I think this card actually increases the consistency of Siege Catapult and Pit Lion a lot. I don't know if it's quite enough to make Token Spell Sword see more play. The Makeshift Defenses would also have synergy with sacrificing cards, such as like a Cruel Fire Bloom or a Soul Split, but I'm looking at it more from the token perspective, and I kind of like what I see, so I think those decks are pretty sweet. I'd like to see them see more play yet again, and Marked Man, while unimpressive by itself, I think adds to the power level of a lot of cards that people may have forgotten about. So I think that is definitely sweet card design there. And here's another card I really like. Moving on to the rares, we have Corsair Ship. So 4-drop, ongoing support with pretty sweet art. Summon a 1/1 Corsair. So I don't have the art for the Corsair, but it looks pretty nice too. It's a 1/1 epic actually. It's a little token that this card generates. And when you summon a creature, equip it with a steel dagger. So immediately you're going to be summoning a 1/1 Corsair, and it's going to get the dagger and become a 2/1. So I don't know. This card has been compared to Hidden Trail a lot. A lot of the cards we've talked about have sort of similar cards that already exist, but this card is clearly really pushing the whole item battle mage idea, or like, you know, I think it's item battle mage for, you know, because like a lot of the red cards have item synergies. So if you play cards like Rihad Horseman or Rihad Battle Mage, for example, immediately you play the Horseman, you get the dagger on it, you have a giant attack Horseman, or you have a Battle Mage with guard and plus defense and all that good stuff. So I think, you know, if we just look at it based on, oh, it's giving everything +1 attack and it can be silenced away, I don't think it's great. But if we look at it from more of a synergy type of a deck, I think this card could see some real potential. Again, we haven't seen everything that's been spoiled so far, so I'm not sure if it's going to be enough for that deck to come to the forefront, but I do think it's very interesting. And I'm excited to experiment with it. Yeah, like I said, not too exciting by itself, but hopefully we see some more cards, and I think there's even one more in this set that could push to that, and I think it's actually... Here is one next. We have Spear of Embers. Now, this is a rare that I'm also really excited about. So it's a prophecy item, the first of its kind, with +3/+3, and instead of equipping Spear of Embers, you may throw it at an enemy creature to deal 3 damage. So not only am I really excited to see that animation in effect, I like to imagine the card itself gets thrown, but I'm pretty sure it's just going to be the spear, excuse me. Prophecy item, that's neat implications, right? So if your opponent's attacking you and you have a guard in the other lane, you can prophecy up one of your guards, or you can simply prophecy one of your attackers and, deal more damage than they've expected, sort of using it as like a makeshift, damage dealing action in that way. Obviously, it has item synergies with the cards I just mentioned with Corsair Ship. So for example, if you have Rihad Battle Mage out, it's just a 3/3 without guard. Your opponent starts attacking, you get a Spear of Embers, you get to choose to either deal some damage to an enemy creature, or you can buff your own guy and give it guard if that's the Battle Mage on board. But yeah, I think this card is super versatile, and I think on the first part of looking at it, we have to say it's obviously very good in Arena. I think removal is a premium, prophecy is a premium, even items that aren't too good by themselves, such as this card, if you're playing it from your hand, are pretty powerful because simply just making your things bigger and trading up. Removals, kind of hard to come by, so they're likely to last longer on board. But Spear of Embers I'm pretty excited about in Arena, and I do think in the right deck it could make a splash in Constructed. It's not like way overpowered or anything, but it's one of those cards that is very, very versatile. It piques my interest the same way Marked Man does. Not too exciting when you first see it, except this is kind of exciting because it does the whole prophecy item thing, which is a new thing in the game. But I think, given what else could be released, what other decks might come to light, I think this card could actually be pretty impactful in the right strategy. So moving on to another rare, the Blood Pact Messenger. This was actually Boom's Life's last preview card, which makes sense because he plays a lot of Pilfer Monk, and we have a Pilfering Khajiit. It is a 2-drop 1/1 with Pilfer, draw 2 cards, sacrifice Blood Pact Messenger at the end of the turn. So a lot of the things that I've read about this card kind of echo my own concerns, in that it's potentially very powerful effect, but not powerful enough to warrant how fragile the card is. Arcane Intellect is the 3-drop spell in Hearthstone that draws you 2 cards. There's an equivalent of that in Magic the Gathering called Divination. There's equivalents in Kaijudo, which I played, called Logo Scan, Energy Stream, Pot of Greed. Except Pot of Greed doesn't cost 3, but most of them cost 3. So we have to sort of analyze it based on, that precedent that those cards have set. So we have a 2-drop Arcane Intellect, which, sacrifices itself and you draw 2 cards. So you're basically, like Arcane Intellect, spending the card, drawing 2 cards. It has some combo potential with cards like Master of Thieves. If you can play this on 2 and then ring out a Master of Thieves on 3, that could potentially be very powerful, drawing 4 cards. But you have a 1/1 that does still have to live for a turn, and that is incredibly hard to do because anything that deals any amount of damage whatsoever is going to deal with a 1/1, in addition to the fact that if your opponent simply plays a guard, such as Kvatch Soldier or Fighter's Guild Recruit, this card is not only just going to die, but it's also going to die for free. That's even worse for you than if they had simply firebolted it, unless you have a way to move it out of harm's way. And at the end of the day, you really are only getting the Arcane Intellect effect, since you're sacrificing a card to draw 2 cards. Of course, you only spent 2 Magicka on that card. However, if you're playing what I would assume is probably an aggressive Pilfer deck, that might not be worth it simply because you're using your 2-drop slot to play the Arcane Intellect effect, which is just giving you cards in your hand, and you're focusing on the board more so. So I'm not really sure if this card, when you look at the risk versus reward, it seems like the risk is way too high for the potential reward. There are other ways to draw cards in Monk, which I realize they need more, but I think we're going to be looking at a card in just a couple minutes that I think answers some of the draw problems for a later game deck using the Monk colors. But even for the early game cards like Thieves Guild Recruit and East March Crusader, they draw you less cards, but by themselves they are still a +1 in value, as in you're getting 1 card more than you had before. Blood Pact Messenger, the same type of deal, since you're getting 2 cards and losing the Blood Pact itself. So I think those cards are just going to be more reliable, and I don't know if this is going to see too much play at all. Moving on to Grand Ball. So sorry for the random cursor over the effect of this card. That was, again, the thing that they had on Legends decks, so I used it. So this card is very, very interesting. 2-drop action, move all friendly creatures. So the kind of card that is either going to be very powerful and game-winning or dead in your hand. Now, this is another one that I don't think... Well, the risk versus reward isn't quite as apparent because the only risk of this card is it simply being dead in your hand, but I think that's a pretty substantial risk if you're playing an aggressive deck, first of all. I don't really see why you would want to use this in a control deck. There's this Shadow Shift for that card, Shadow Shift for that effect. I don't know. If we get more effects that really benefit from being moved, such as like a Dune Smuggler buff, obviously if you have Dune Smuggler on the board or 2 of them and you grand ball everything's going to get like +1/+1 times however many Dune Smugglers you have. But at the moment, I don't really see too much reason to play this. There's always a situation where you have like 3 things stockpiled in a lane and your opponent plays this big guard and you can't move everything out of the way until you top deck grand ball and everything goes to the other lane and you can finally attack your opponent for lethal. But I feel like that's sort of a fringe type of situation, and more often than not, a single moving card with more versatility like a Shadow Shift or a Dune Stalker is going to do the job better, or simply using removal to get past what you need to get past. But, you know, given what could be released in the future, this card could see play. I could see that. But as of right now, I think the power level is simply too low, although it would be very surprising and very interesting to lose to, we'll say. I think that would be the word. So now we move on to the last card in this video, and it is the one epic we're going to be talking about today. This was Dazer's card reveal, Eclipse Baroness, and he said it was crazy when it released, and if we were doing a true first impressions video, which is if I did this like the day after it revealed or something, I probably would be not talking it up as much as I'm about to, because on first glance I thought, oh my god, 8 magic, this is going to be, you know, pretty difficult to get off. But on further evaluation, this card packs a ton of value, and it's actually probably, I would say, maybe, you know, probably top 10% of the cards that have been revealed so far. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth by saying that, but I do think this card is super huge value later in the game. And like Dazer said, he's really hyped about it in Control Monk, which is what we talked about with Card Draw a couple cards ago, and Ramp Scout. And, you know, after thinking about it for a few days, I've, you know, basically come to those conclusions. Those seem like the decks where this card would be at the highest power level and utility. We have an 8-drop 5/5 with Summon and Last Gasp, draw a card and reduce its cost by 2. So we have giant Thieves Guild Recruit basically. So you're getting value when you play it. It's actually presenting a reasonable threat in the control mirror. This card is not going to be able to be lightning bolted, and using a card like Javelin or even the Manticore effect on it probably isn't like the ideal target for those single target removals, especially considering you know, besides it not being that threatening, it's just threatening enough to demand an answer, and of course when it dies, you get to draw another card and reduce its cost by 2 again. So the magic reduction is pretty huge, and the simple +2 in value this card gives you, or well, not really +2 in value because you do lose the Baroness if you want to get the second card, but it's an immediate +1 on a big body with the reduction. It does demand an answer because it is a 5/5, it's not like a very tiny body, and if it does get answered, you're getting another card. I think this card fills a pretty important role in maybe a Ramp Scout or a Control Monk deck. Control Monk especially doesn't have much late game ways to draw. A lot of people have resorted to using cards like Orb of Vermina and Heroic Rebirth to sort of make up for it, maybe Altar of Despair. But I think Baroness sort of offers the most consistent type of late game draw we've seen for green. Obviously, top decking a Thieves Guild Recruit even later in the game is never really that bad because you're getting another card deeper in your deck. This card offers you that while giving you a potential extra card in addition to the reasonable body. You know, it's a 5/5, it's not a 1/2. This is something that's actually going to threaten when you do want to start turning up the heat in a control mirror. This card is actually going to be able to do that for you, whereas Thieves Guild Recruit or most of the other things in your deck probably are not. And it, you know, it does increase the odds of the chances that you will get to play whatever you draw off the effect if you're in a top decking situation, because you do get the reduction as well. Obviously, the main weaknesses to this card, cards like Belligerent Giant, aggro decks in general. If you haven't stabilized against an aggro deck, I don't think you'll ever be wanting to play the Eclipse Baroness. It seems like a card that would do nothing to the board, so not really where you want to be. But when we're talking about these late game value cards, we sort of accept that they're going to be bad if you're getting beaten down and you've never won the board back. That's why so many cards in your deck are dedicated to doing so. And Eclipse Baroness is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, where if you're in a control mirror, this is the card that's really dedicated to winning those value games. And in a value war where you're up against like a control mage or something later in the game with your Ramp Scout, now this card to me is even more threatening than them playing a Histgrove early. I see Eclipse Baroness and I think, wow, how am I going to come back from that amount of value? So I'm actually really excited about it. I think this card is definitely going to see a good amount of constructed play. I don't exactly know how many copies, but I do expect to see some more people experimenting with Control Monk, some more people experimenting with this card in Ramp Scout, and maybe even other decks as well. It does fill the 8-drop slot for any deck based around Altar of Despair. I don't think those decks are going to be too high power level still, but I do think the 8-drop slot was one of the weaker slots, so maybe it does see a good amount of play. And I believe that's all we have for this video, so hopefully you've enjoyed. Definitely a ton of interesting cards we've talked about. I think we've seen cards that benefit aggro, I don't know if I talked about this too much, but besides the item synergy cards, I do think Spear of Embers is a pretty natural fit in Prophecy Aggro Battle Mage. I sort of remembered to talk about that after we had passed over the card, but I didn't want to just come back to it randomly. I do think this card is pretty good in Prophecy Aggro Battle Mage. Do intend to test it, so we've seen cards for aggro, we've seen cards for sort of fringe playable decks that have sort of fallen off, such as the Token Spellsword decks, the item Battle Mage decks, which it's a deck that I've, when I first got into the game, I saw the item synergy cards, and I was like, oh, this could be a good deck, and it just wasn't, but maybe we see that in the future. We've seen cards for control decks, like we just talked about, maybe Dark Guardian as well, and we've seen some pretty good cards for Arena, so I think it's looking like a very diverse set, very well balanced so far. Really excited to see the last 10 cards. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, feel free to subscribe for more content, card analysis, first impressions videos, stream highlights. Feel free to follow the stream in the link at the description for daily Legend streams. Feel free to let me know what you thought about the First Impressions series. Like I mentioned, this is the last for the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood expansion, but if more cards get released, obviously we're going to be having an expansion sometime in the summer. I'd like to do these again. Let me know if you liked the format of them. They seem to go over pretty well from what I have seen, but of course this is a channel for the people. The content is here for you, so I'm always eager to hear your reception of it. Feel free to, like I said, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.